welcome to The Presumption. Hi, Jim. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Sara and Jim.
So August 18, this is our crime time on Coburger, as we've been doing. August 18 was a big, huge motion day for Coburger in the Idaho case. And lots of things happen in court, but I think really the conceptually, the salient point of the whole day was that this judge is not going to limit Coburger's ability to fight like hell in his defense, because this is a death penalty case. And I think he made that very clear in his rulings, which Jim and I will discuss in a minute. But at the same time, I think he also made clear that he's not going to allow court procedures and laws to be manipulated, specifically with respect to Coburger's speedy trial right and wanting a continuous stay as opposed to just waiving that right like most defendants often do. So first and foremost, Jim, I think, there's been a lot of weird, misplaced dismay over the fact that he got to wear a suit and was not shackled, even though there was no jury at this proceeding. And I, of course, Robert Blake, a case that I was on, did the same thing. Lori Vallow recently in Idaho wore street clothes to some of her pretrial hearings. Nicholas Cruz, trying to think, I think Menendez brothers, OJ for sure, the Ahmaud Arbery father and son defendants. So what do you have to say about this stupid outrage over Coburger was wearing a suit?
Yeah, it is stupid. And, we dealt with this in the Murdoch case.
Yes.
Initially, when he would come to court, he was shackled in a jumpsuit. And we had to file a motion. I mean, there are U.S. Supreme Court decisions, that you don't shackle a defendant in front of a jury, and because that is prejudicial. And when you have a high-profile case that every pre-trial hearing is broadcast, I mean, the same considerations are at play. And so,
well, the jury's watching.
Yeah.
Potential jury's watching.
Of course they are. And so,
and
so I don't know if the motion was filed behind the scenes or just, a request was made and it was granted.
Yeah. And you know what I said? I mean, I guess every jurisdiction is different, but here in LA, you just it's not a written motion. You don't need briefing. You don't need to put in those Supreme Court cases. You just basically state the reason why you need the accommodation, and the order is by the court to the jail facility to accommodate. Right. I mean, it's as simple as that, right?
It really is. And here, I mean, it wasn't something that the prosecutor got involved in, but it's, it's logistically, getting the jail folks to dress him out. And so, and I got to tell you, I saw a few clips of the hearing, and whether he's cleaned up, he's gotten a haircut or shaved his eyebrows, I don't know what, but he does not look like a murderer to me. Now, there's no such thing as, who looks like a murderer, but I mean, he looks like a college kid, and I'm just
anyone will look like a murderer if you're looking at them through the lens of guilt. Any eyebrow is bushy if you're looking for a bushy eyebrow. I mean, a lot of this is sort of like the confirmation bias, I guess, to some extent. Had this roommate not said that this person had a bushy eyebrow, I don't think we'd look at Coburger and say he has a bushy eyebrow. I think that we would, say he's got very pronounced features, his eyes, his nose and stuff, but we wouldn't go straight to his eyebrow. And that's the problem I have, Jim, and you do too, I'm sure, with eyewitness accounts and testimony. They're one of the most
eyebrow witness in this case.
Eyebrow witness, exactly, because they're one of the most flawed and unreliable types of evidence, because there's actual science behind things like trauma and police practices, creating a misidentification. And so it's just not reliable. And specifically this witness, made inconsistent statements about him and his description and the suspect and all that anyway. So the other big part of this hearing was that 4 witnesses testified for the defense in its fight to get the IgG materials. So these were DNA experts, IgG experts, and one of them was a lawyer who had, specific DNA and IgG experience. And so the prosecutor was kicking and screaming. He did not want witnesses to testify. And one of the witnesses, you guys, had a PowerPoint presentation, which I love demonstratives, especially, PowerPoint, you think, I'm going to use it in front of a jury, but this was a judge hearing, court hearing. And so, and I think it was so compelling because, first of all, the judge, I think, sent a loud and clear message that this is a death penalty case. So I'm not going to limit the defense's ability to fight for what they think they need to put on a defense. And he let all those experts testify. And he also let the PowerPoint in during the testimony as she was explaining the IGG process. And what stood out to me was that not just the substance of that IGG expert's testimony, who basically talks about certain instances where IGG protocol was not followed by the FBI, and that led to unreliability of the evidence. But the form of her testimony with this presentation, PowerPoint presentation, was so compelling because it was so drawn out and like complex. And you realize that every branch of that family tree is supported by evidence, and there's protocol and there's chronology. And so to me, that was incredibly effective because this is a case of first impression, I'm sure, for this judge, as is for many people around the country. And it just showed that this prosecutor is wanting us to accept that this is some weird thing and it's just an investigative tool and we don't need to meddle with it, just accept it. But no, it's like a huge, complicated thing because of the way that she presented it. So I don't know what your take is, Jim, on the defense's presentation of why they need this. Why is it material? Why is it relevant?
It is material. It is relevant. I mean, at this point, it has to be because, as I understand it, that is how they identified Coburger's father and got probable when then they did the trash search at his house, and then they started doing, traditional DNA testing. And so, is that the road that led to Coburger, or is the car that led to Coburger? Is it, how did they get there? And for them to say, oh, we relied on science to get there. Oh, but it's not really science. Well, we need to know.
Well, I think,
what is it?
Right. And I think the prosecution has been saying it's not science, and the SDR is science. The SNP is not. The SNP and the family tree are not. And there really is a blatant effort to divorce IgG from science and from the SDR. The defense, I think, has done a fabulous job, given that, again, this is a case of first impression, to unite SDR with SNP. So if you think about it, Jim, the prosecution saying we're not using IgG at trial, so there is nothing to suppress, essentially, right? Because it's not evidence coming in. But what the defense is doing is saying, because the SNP is so closely tied with the SDR, because without the SNP you wouldn't get to the SDR, right? And the one-on-one match, that we would suppress the SDR, and the SDR is definitely coming in at trial. So I think it's fascinating to me, to the point where I want to go get a crash course on IgG as it pertains to the law. But it's a very clever argument, because they're saying, fine, you're not using SNP or IgG as evidence, but you are using the one-on-one match as evidence. And because they're so closely tied, they haven't said it in so many words, but I'm reading through the strategy here, and I can see motions to quash, arrest warrant, search warrant, indictment, and potentially motion to suppress, because we don't need to suppress the IgG. It's so tied in with the SDR that we're suppressing the SDR. The whole thing goes, it's like a package, Right. So it'll be interesting to see if this gets turned over, because the judge did not rule on it.
So hang on, Sarah. What I want you to do, Matt, take a step back and say you're the person who just came home from work. You turn on the news and you're watching a replay of this hearing, and what you see is a well-dressed young man who doesn't look the part of a murderer. You see defense lawyers trying to get information that led to his arrest, and you see the prosecution not wanting to give it. And Sarah, you're talking about STR and SNPs and IgG, but I'm telling you, your jury pool, I think they're probably not getting lost in all of that, but they do see the state not wanting to give the defense evidence,
Right.
and why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? And I think the state's making a big mistake by fighting on this.
Well, but also, Jim, the idea that it's, let's just say, it's just an investigation. It's like an investigation. Well, that is exactly what a defendant needs to challenge and test, is the investigation, right? And so if it is, let's just buy into their argument that it's investigation. Well, why can't we see the investigation so that we can test it and challenge it, right? Through our own independent analysis. So you're right. That this is, I see this whole other thing now talking to you. Well, it's not just about the suit and that future jury pool looking at the defendant in a suit versus shackles on a uniform. It's also that future jury pool looking at, really prosecution's being an asshole here, with not trying to turn this over.
Right. So I think.
But what do you say about
the defense won the day today? Now, regardless of Judge ruling, I think the defense won the day today.
Right. But what about the fact that they're saying, and Ann Taylor is not accusing them of any shade or purposeful withholding, but they've said it before that the FBI doesn't have it. They just viewed it and they deleted it.
Right.
And so, but isn't that a fact? Sometimes we present what should have been done, but wasn't done. The lack of evidence that should have been preserved and presented as a way to dismantle the prosecution's case. So isn't that also significant? If it's true that the FBI doesn't have anything to turn over, I mean, aren't we supposed to at least look at the protocol that they should have saved it and they didn't? I mean, isn't that failure also evidence?
For sure.
Okay. Yeah. So that brings us to the idea of, the judge might allow this in, might not allow this in. And that brings us to an October 2nd trial. As we, again, this podcast is not in real time. By the time it airs, that date might have been continued because of time waiver. But as of August 18th, October 2nd was supposed to be the trial date. And there was a previous stay, and now the defense wanted another stay. And the judge said, no, you're not going to use the stay power of the court to not exercise your right to essentially waive speedy trial like any defendant would, right? And so it brings up an interesting issue, because initially the stay was granted because the defense wanted the grand jury materials, and it wasn't fair that the prosecution was delaying discovery and then forcing Coburger to waive time. So that there was like 37 days or something granted. Now we don't have that problem because they've complied and they've produced the grand jury materials. So I was thinking, and I keep getting asked this, whether he will waive time or not. And I keep thinking about how crazy it makes prosecutors when they just can't fathom how a death penalty case will go in, 6 weeks. But the defendant also is not waiving time. What do you think is going on here?
I think the defense is keeping the pressure on at this point in time, but I'm not sure they're going to continue down this path. It is a death penalty case, and we talked earlier, if they do get the IgG dump, it's going to take a while to dig through that.
Right.
And so
they have the experts on deck, but they don't have the meat to analyze, right? And so they need time to do that. And by the way, Jim, even if let's just say that the PCA is all they have, that there's no other evidence that we're just not aware of, which I doubt. I think there's probably more that we just don't see because of the gag order and all that. But let's just say the PCA is all they have. And I could see really sort of pushing and getting your experts to prepared and all that to go to trial, because like you and Murdoch, you don't want to allow more time and opportunity for the prosecution to prepare. the problem here is, like you said, in a death penalty case, you have the death penalty phase after the guilt phase, which requires mitigation. And that means going through Brian Coburger's entire life, speaking to witnesses, getting statements, preparing them, getting his childhood records, psych records, addiction records, school records. I mean, this takes massive time. So that's why I just don't think October 2nd is a reality, right?
I don't think so. I don't think it is either. But
would it be seen as like a political move if it gets like it has to be on the 2nd? Like, is that something that the defense is like, like extra upset about because they don't really get the amount of time that they need?
You raise a good point. If, say, the defense asks for a continuance, I mean, at this point in time, do they get one? I mean, is that your question, Matt? I think
yeah. I guess my question is you guys are saying, if this IgG evidence comes out, then the defense needs ample time to comb through it. Right. But if the judge and the prosecution is saying, no, we have to do this on the 2nd, isn't that just sort of like further proof that they don't want the defense looking and analyzing this information? And doesn't that ultimately kind of contribute to whether or not this is a fair trial?
Oh, I agree with that. It will be interesting to see what the state's position is in the event that the defense says, okay, we want a continuance, we waive time. The state has a right to a speedy trial as well. And so it's not a one-way street. Although up to this point, it seems like the state has been willing and wishing that he waives time so they don't have to get prepared. It costs a lot of money. I mean, so, they're what, 6 weeks out, maybe two months out. And believe me, Sarah's done it. I've done it in all sorts of cases, but it's just in this case, I mean, everyone's under a microscope and everyone's working 18 hours a day right now. I am sure.
And they have been around the clock, but the other little, I don't want to say little points, a big point, but something that came up is this prosecutor was really frustrated that Brian Coburger's alibi is not specific and that we don't know if he's going to bring up witnesses and I'm going to be ambushed and this is not trial by ambush. And so, look, I think it's really clear that Ann Taylor said that we may be bringing in his or corroborating his alibi statement, which is he was driving around alone, via expert witnesses. So in my opinion, given what we know about this case, those expert witnesses are going to be the prosecution's or even the defense's cast expert and the OnStar expert, because those are the two factors that go to him driving, having his phone, driving, cell tower picking up the pings from his phone, the direction of his car being picked up by the OnStar. So it's clear what she's saying. She's saying, he's alone. So I don't have any witnesses to bring to you. And you're not going to be forcing a defendant to testify and invoke his Fifth Amendment just because you want to know now who's going to corroborate his alibi statement. So basically the judge said, look, if you are bringing in independent witnesses, there's this deadline you got to meet. And we don't want to take away the prosecution's ability to investigate independently. But if not, then you just rely on the process of trial. And so I really thinking, look, you didn't have an alibi in Murdoch. I bring Murdoch because I just use Murdoch all the time as a point of reference now. But you didn't have an alibi. We thought for a minute you would, and then it went away. But it just in general, it's like, look, an alibi can be corroborated by the defendant himself if he chooses to take the stand, which is the absolute sacrosanct right he has, or other witnesses, experts or civilians, or just not, right? I mean, I don't know why they're pushing so hard.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to what data is available from his car. In Murdoch, Alec had a late model 2020, 2021 GMC Suburban, and the early on, the state sent a search warrant to General Motors, and they got nothing back. And then so they took the vehicle and the brains of the vehicle to the FBI, and they like reverse engineered something. And they went around their asshole to get to their elbow, and then they're at trial testifying, and then somebody's watching it on TV at General Motors and said, why did we not give them the GPS data? And lo and behold, right after that FBI agent testified, guess what shows up from General Motors? The GPS data off the car. So
yeah.
And it was a lot more reliable and accurate.
Jim, what do you think about, just because you've been doing this, you've worked with experts on this more recently. Alex's car was a 2021, whatever it was. Coburger's car, I can't remember because the model kept changing.
Right. I think it was 2015 or something, yeah.
Yeah, it was somewhere between 2011 and 2015. So that's...
And it was an Elantra. And so I suspect that it does not have the same information that was being transmitted that a General Motors has. But I don't know. I don't know what...
well, if it doesn't, if it doesn't, because one of the things I've always maintained is that the worst fact for Coburger is, in my opinion, based on what we know so far, is that during the window of the murders, his phone, people say it's off. We don't know if it was off, was not picking up connectivity. And that could be off airplane mode or just didn't pick up cell service because the cell towers weren't working, right? However, the problem he has is that on 12 other occasions during that same time frame, his phone was pinged by the cell towers covering the Kings Road, home, the range of that, the radius where that home is located. So that is challenging to explain. Okay. I'm not going to lie. It is. And right. However, if there's data from his car, that makes it even more challenging if those two things align. There's no data from his car. I think there's some explanations that can be offered down the road. But the last point I want to hear you chime in on, Jim, is the if the IgG materials are produced and there's actually some issues where they didn't follow DOJ protocol, or there's some sort of issue that goes to reliability, the possible motions or, I guess, relief that the defense could seek. I mean, I think they could move to quash the arrest and search warrant, right? And indictment.
I mean, that would be their hope. Honestly, that's a stretch because, as you know, in the field of search warrants, there's the good faith exception, reliance on the warrant, and it is, it's the exception that swallows the rule. So you can have a defective search warrant. You have information that you rely upon that is defective, but unless the officers who are executing the search warrant knew it was defective, they're going to get a pass as,
And that's so hard to prove. You're trying to prove absence of good faith or presence of bad faith. And who are you relying on to show that? A bunch of officers.
You're exactly right. It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Unless you can prove the officer lied on the application. I mean, short of that, it's pretty damn tough. So.
All right. So we're going to take a brief break. We do want you to please, we get all these amazing comments that you're really liking our podcast. So what we want to ask you to do so that we can continue bringing you this podcast is to go to all the platforms that you use to listen to the podcast, like Spotify and Apple. Give us stars, give us a review, tell us what you think and your feedback. And then also go on YouTube and do the same thing, because those two things are disconnected for now. And follow us as these episodes drop every week. We listen to you. We listen to what you like to listen to and try to deliver. And we're going to take a brief break. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Mo Kelly, media personality. And he's got a very colorful career and experience that he's going to share with us. We're going to talk everything about celebrity justice, injustice, and about a lot of stuff that you guys like, which is your driven by your true crime obsession. So he's going to touch on that as well. So stay with us. Welcome back to The Presumption. I'm Sarah Azari with Jim Griffin and Matt Fondelier, and we're now joined by Mr. Mo Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, I always learn something new, even though when I think I know people on our podcast, because I didn't know your name was Morris O'Kelly. So now I learned this about you. I've known you for years. And I always thought this is an interesting name, Mo Kelly, Mr. Mo Kelly. But anyway, so Morris O'Kelly is a radio and television commentator specializing in politics, current affairs, and entertainment. Presently hosting Later with Mo Kelly weeknights on the number one news talk station in America, KFI AM 640 in Los Angeles, and iHeartRadio. Mo was honored as Journalist of the Year Radio for 2020 by the LA Press Club and Entertainer of the Year by the Latin Business Association for 2021. He's also a 2023 Journalist Law School Fellow with Loyola Law School. He is a featured commentator on American affairs for BBC Radio, Talk TV, and CNN International globally. His daily radio commentary, Mo Kelly's 2-Minute Warning, he means business when he warns you, but is syndicated nationally in 60 markets via the Black Information Network and iHeartMedia. He's provided commentary on News Nation, The Grio, CNN International, MSNBC, and on other platforms. And prior to forging his own media brand, Mo helped guide the radio careers of entertainment personalities such as Jim Rome, Ryan Seacrest, and Tavis Smiley. Mo's op-ed has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and hundreds of other news and entertainment outlets. I mean, the list goes on because you've been doing this for a long time. And I guess one thing that we want to know to start is, how do you cover such vast grounds, in what you do, not just across platforms, but in terms of the genre that when I met you, you were deep into Trump and politics. And the next thing I knew, we reconnected, and you had me come on your show, which was, mostly pop culture and entertainment. So how is it that you do this great job in this very vast landscape?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I think, with all due deference to my bio that you were reading, I didn't think you were going to read the whole thing, but part of that was working in radio for Jim Rome, sports, Ryan Seacrest, entertainment, Tavis Smiley, politics. You get a modicum of understanding of how all those subjects not only are distinct in nature, but how they also cross over. And in our media today, in a very general sense, sports stories often become political stories. And you have political stories which often become entertainment stories. Our most recent president, the former president, was an entertainment personality primarily, not a political figure. So the lines have been blurred, and there's really no line of demarcation between sports, entertainment, and politics. And if anything, to answer your question, it's all one subject in my head.
Right. I mean, the president you're talking about was a reality TV star. And I want to talk to you about that as well, because there's some stuff going on there. Need some house cleaning, apparently, from what I know. But I mean, that's always very. It's nice not to have to be. I mean, we live in such a branded, niched time. It's nice to be able to have that diversity that you do. So look, Mo, Britney Spears. I mean, Jim and I talk about her always in some sort of a legal drama, a legal dilemma that she's having. Obviously, we're not, we don't dislike her. We're also not fans. We don't go to her concerts, but she constantly.
Hey, speak for yourself, all right? Maybe I went to a Britney Spears concert. You don't know that.
I mean, right. I mean, look, the conservatorship I want you to talk to us about, but most recently, she was in Las Vegas, and she had her own security detail, but she was behind Wemby, the basketball player, at one of the big hotels. I think it was Aria or whatever. And she goes and taps Wemby in the back. So he's, much taller than her. She's behind him. He has no idea who it is. And so one of his security details essentially grabs her to push her hand away right? Am I right, Mo?
You're right. Knocked her hand off his back.
Knocked her hand off his back. So, Jim, I mean, there was this whole thing, as you recall, about being a battery, and was it a battery? Is she going to get, I mean, is he going to get charged with security detail because she made a big fuss about it, even though they apologized to her? And you then, Mo, tell us the story about what you did and how she clapped back at you.
Sure. I talked about it from the standpoint of having worked in the music industry for a good 13, 14 years for a variety of record companies, dealing with high profile talent. And let me co-sign Matt. I'm a huge Britney Spears fan. So there is no animosity. I was commenting on it from understanding how the industry works and also how security is very protective of high profile talent. They're in Las Vegas. There's generally a star driven crowd. In other words, you have a lot of fans who want to get close to stars. And Victor Wembanyama is the number one overall pick. He's probably worth some $10 million right now. Hasn't played a game, but he is a tremendous commodity for the NBA. So that's why he has security. And I talked about it from the standpoint of understanding that when someone has personal security, you cannot just run up from behind and try to put your hands on someone ever, because security is there for one reason, and that's to keep people from running up behind and putting their hands on the client. And I talked about that from being in the industry and saying that security may not have known it was Britney Spears or may not have cared it was Britney Spears. They're hired to make sure that no one can put their hands on Victor Wembanyama. And let's also look at this from the context of we're in an age where Will Smith has assaulted Chris Rock. We're in an age where someone ran up on the stage and tried to assault Dave Chappelle. We have people throwing phones and all sorts of items at performers. Cardi B threw a microphone at a person who threw a drink at her on stage. So the idea that a celebrity would not be attacked is or would be attacked is not far-fetched at all. And I talked about it from that standpoint. She took particular offense at me siding with the security, and she didn't use my name, but she used my verbiage almost word for word, saying that I didn't understand or that she is the victim in all this. And I
so you mentioned the swear on your radio show.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And she then clapped back at you on what platform?
On Instagram, talking about this radio host said X, Y, and Z. We played her audio and my audio, and it was almost identical word for word. So then I addressed her directly saying, Britney, this is why we said this. This is why you can't run up behind someone and grab someone. It's a personal safety issue. It's not because someone was mistreating you. And I said, Britney, you're not correct. They didn't hit you. They moved your hand off the client. You know, if you don't grab the person, there is no interaction. There is no problem here. But you
by the way, look, Jim, first of all, I think we have like a celebrity battery spree here, the way that Mo lined them up. But by the way, someone can make an argument that her touching him is the first battery. She made the first offensive touching, you know, and then, you know what I'm saying? It's always in the law, it's about who starts the conduct, right? And so an argument could also be made that like she didn't have permission to, you know, touch the guy from the back and stuff. And so she made the first offensive touching. I mean, there's an argument there, maybe not that strong, but Jim, were you going to ask something?
Yeah, you know, I think I was just going to point out that this is much ado about nothing. I mean, she touched his back and security removed her hand and she should have walked on and everyone would have gone about their business. But that's not the climate that musicians or stars, you know, that they wouldn't get press over that. So that's about all I have to say about it. I will say I vacationed for a few summers with an NBA star. We just happened to go to the same place. It was a horse riding place. I took my kids and he could not ride a horse because the NBA said there's a lot of restrictions on what NBA players can do because of Mo. You're right. I mean, you said 10 million. I bet it's 100 million what that kid is worth today for as a franchise player. But
I mean, I don't know how much of what she did was for PR versus really feeling violated in some way. I don't know. I can't. I don't know enough about her or her mental state to be able to say, oh, this was all. She didn't think this was a battery. She was just trying to make a big fuss to get some attention. I don't know. but she sure as hell got a lot of attention with the conservatorship, which, even though I don't do probate law, and I don't think you do that either, Jim, right?
No, I
Yeah.
mean, I've been involved in some probate litigation, but not
Me too.
not
Yeah.
that.
So I believe that I felt like I thought that was a terrible situation. I thought the father was a terrible choice of conservator, but I'm not sure that I'm convinced that she doesn't need some supervision. What are your thoughts around that, Mo?
I am sympathetic to her plight. I'm sympathetic to her overall story. I understood the need for it. There were times that she had exhibited behavior which was concerning, that she might be a danger to herself. And I understood originally the need for the conservatorship. And also I understand after a certain point, it might have been abused, and she was abused in the sense of not having any control over her person in that conservatorship, being forced to perform and not have any autonomy over her life. At the same time, with the removal of the conservatorship, she has been displaying, I would say, very questionable behavior. And I don't know if she's receiving wise counsel. Let's give some perspective and context. She's been a child star her whole life and has not managed her affairs at any point in her life. I don't know if she's competent to manage her financial affairs. I don't know if she's competent to manage her personal affairs. But I do know what I see on social media suggests to me that she is struggling with dealing with day-to-day life on some level. And it bears itself out when you see that situation with Wembanyama, where you and me and any other person who's accustomed to dealing with people in these situations would not have turned it into something more than it was, and she did. I don't think she's getting wise counsel. I'm not going to try to diagnose her from a distance, but I would say I am very concerned about her behavior.
But it's not about us diagnosing her. I mean, I think it's a fact that she struggles with mental illness, and that even during that conservatorship, she had to have the conservator, not the father, but the medical supervisor, I guess, in the conservatorship, had to administer her medication, etc. And this is, to me, it's a reality that often people that need medication don't take it, or they avoid it. And I don't, some of this behavior could be because of that. And the only reason I bring it up, Mo, is because I feel like, somebody with her platform and her reach should actually be the voice of destigmatizing mental illness. And one way to do that is to, take the bull by its horns, get better, whatever you need to be able to manage your life from day to day, and then show people that it's just like having COVID. You go treat yourself. You know what I mean? I mean, I think I look at celebrities as having a bigger responsibility when it comes to substance abuse, mental illness, the stigma around it, getting help, etc.
Well, there's a could and should aspect to this. Should she? Yes. Is she able to? I don't know. I don't know that she's a fully formed, mature individual who at any time has been able to exhibit adult behavior and manage her affairs, going back to what I said before. And if she's not that person who is handling her personal affairs, including her emotional health and her mental health, then I don't know if she can take that next step and be an example to others. When honestly, if you look at her social media, she's more concerned with settling scores and proving other people wrong and perceived grievances, which may not be real for all I know. That's what she's focusing on. And that's where her mind is. So I can't say that she would be ready then to be an advocate to destigmatize mental health issues.
Right. Right. I mean, she has to be well to be able to set an example. But there's also, the concern about the people that she is always sort of brought in, like the guy that she's with now, the young Iranian actor or whatever. Is he managing her affairs? I don't know. I mean, getting rid of your dad who's abusive is one thing, but you know how it goes. People, when there's fame, there's also the vulture.
I'm going to weigh in here, which is probably a dangerous thing, but I mean, some people are entitled to fail on their own, and she's an adult, and and she's being coddled. And I don't know if she's capable of handling her own affairs, but people deserve a chance to do it on their own. Now, since the conservatorship has been canceled, I mean, is she doing it on her own? Is she managing her own affairs? Or is she under conservatorship? I mean, I don't know the answer to those questions, but.
No, she's done, right, Mo? She's
making her own decisions. She's making her own financial decisions, professional decisions, personal life decisions. And yes, we are speculating as to how well she's doing that, but I don't think it's speculation to see that she is not putting forth a public face, which increases confidence, but more causes concern. As to whether she is competent to manage all these things at once, much less one portion of them.
Well, I can tell you the whole grievances that people are espousing on social media, particularly Twitter. I mean, it seems to be an epidemic. I mean, everyone's gotten the grievance about something, and that's why it's such a toxic environment, in my opinion. But so I don't want to put it all on Britney's feet. I did see her, Matt, at the Bellagio. She was outdoors filming a MTV segment back probably 20 years ago, and I was a fan then. I'm a fan today.
I appreciate you even made a reference to Toxic, one of her greatest hits, which I know was intentional on your part.
Yeah, I did not even know that, but hey.
So the other thing I thought was interesting, Mo, to get your insight on is the concept of celebrity justice, right? So there was a time, and we have a great little photo lineup that we did. There was a time where it was about OJ going before court, MJ, Michael Jackson with the child molestation charges, Robert Blake, whose case I was on, who, by the way, and if the picture's going, I mean, Robert Blake, that's his mugshot, but we made sure he doesn't look like that by the time trial started. He had gray hair, very frail. So that even got him more sympathy. But those were different times where I think when a celebrity had even the most serious issues with the law, criminal issues, there was just this inclination of giving deference, law enforcement, jurors. I mean, you name it in the system. And then, we sort of fast forward to R. Kelly. I'm not saying this in order, but like Cosby, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, Danny Masterson, for example. These are guys who the system has not been kind to, at all. And partly has to do with Me Too, starting in 2017 and on. Things are different now in courtrooms. But I want to get your viewpoint on how much of this, and also Johnny Depp, Johnny Depp, who prevailed in that defamation suit, how much of this has to do with celebrity injustice, using celebrities to make an example versus maybe a shift away from what we've seen, historically.
I don't know if it's either. I think it's both and. I think we've changed as a society in our perception of celebrities. The laws have changed. Like in Nevada with Bill Cosby, there are people who have come forward now because the law has changed. Yeah. And now the statute of limitations has been extended where they can file some of these lawsuits. And there's also the idea that some of the people, we have more evidentiary tools available to convict or to bring to justice some of these people. There's much more mass media. There are interviews. Like, for example, the Bill Cosby, we had opportunity to listen to his deposition that he made, and also contrast that to his public statements. There's just more tools available to possibly convict or try people. And with social media, everybody has something to say. And I think that clouds the issue. It muddies the waters. And of course, it impacts the jury pool. So yes, we can take them on a case-by-case basis, but to make a general statement, I think we're much more cynical now, and we're much more inclined to disbelieve someone who is a celebrity and believing more that person has had that deferential treatment, that preferential treatment in terms of how police, like for example, with OJ, how many times did law enforcement go to OJ's door when there were possibly issues of domestic violence going on in that house? I know that I wrote extensively about R. Kelly during his first trial of child pornography and the unwillingness of general society to believe the people, like including me, who worked in the industry and said, this man is a predator. There is ample evidence. He's tried to pay off other witnesses. But because society changed, and I think the proliferation of social media, I think our perceptions began to change. We had some documentaries with R. Kelly, which I think were fundamental in changing how people viewed R. Kelly, for example. So I think in the totality of things, it all worked together to change how our view of celebrities generally and these individuals specifically. Let me just add one more thing, and also how celebrities behave in this day. O.J. Simpson, I think if he were acquitted and just went away and was very quiet, his perception would be very different today. In the way that Robert Blake, someone who I ran into rather frequently after he was acquitted, because we both lived in the Studio City area, and I would see him almost weekly at the Sportsman's Lodge, and he would be there and have dinner, but he was very quiet to himself. He would acknowledge people, people would acknowledge him, very recognizable, but he conducted himself in a different way. So I think people looked at Robert Blake differently when he passed than as opposed to the recent years of O.J. Simpson, for example.
But do you think that we are also more, because we have more access to celebrities because of social media, we get to take a glimpse into their lives. Do you think that we are more aware that, that Hollywood is not perfect, that there are like, look at him doing this, look at her doing that, they're more like regular human beings to us. I mean, do you think that has something to do with it too?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But in addition to that, like, for example, our concept of right and wrong has changed. Using the example of Bill Cosby, we didn't even have a term for date rape or marriage rape until like 1993, or the expectation of what was considered acceptable behavior for a celebrity and the permissive nature of Hollywood as far as the Me Too type of behavior that we think is unacceptable today, but was readily acceptable 20, 25, 30 years ago. So I think all of it has moved us to a different point in time. The individuals likely were the same. The behavior of Bill Cosby didn't change from 1969 to 1989. Just our perception of what was acceptable in society did change.
So Sarah, I mean, you're out there in Hollywood, you're a lawyer. Are celebrities getting passes on criminal behavior? People are looking the other way like they did.
Not anymore.
Right?
Yeah, no, not anymore. I mean, the most recent, you and I know this, Jim, it's not a pass. It's because, it's because there's not enough evidence, right, to go after somebody for something. But, and the example of that was with Armie Hammer, who recently finally got a reject of charges because this was one of those situations. It was a Me Too sexual assault claim that I think went to Gloria Allred's office, but it was like there were messages and stuff about how it was a rough sex situation. Okay, so I say that the idea of consent has gotten even murkier because of the type of sex that comes before the court. The type of sex that comes before the court is no longer the regular traditional sex. You meet somebody at the bar and then you have regular sex. It's like all kinds of weird shit with like, violence and some people are into that. And so it was that kind of a situation. And the girl had bruises or whatnot. And she was saying that, she was assaulted and she was, violated. Well, I think that the DA's office just wasn't confident they could prove the case because there was evidence that she had asked for it, by the way, like you can ask for it today and change your mind tomorrow, but for whatever reason, they didn't feel like they could prove their case. So filing it and not be able to prove it is actually a disservice to the accuser. And so his case got rejected. I don't think it's because he's Armie Hammer and comes from this dynasty of wealth. I mean, I think they just didn't have the right case. I mean, Mo, can you think of any case recently that is like basically getting special treatment because of celebrity?
Yeah, I would say Dana White, president of the UFC, he was on video slapping his wife in a club. And yes, it was they were in a confrontation with each other. The fact that he slapped her not once, but maybe twice, if I remember correctly, and it received no real pushback from inside the organization or the general public, said to me that his celebrity gave him a pass that other people would not. I'm not going to look at Dana White for slapping his wife and say that's different from what happened with Ray Rice in an elevator. You know, if we're talking about hitting a woman is wrong and criminal in nature, well, then let's be consistent in that regard. And I believe that Dana White did not represent an organization which was more accommodating to violence. And also, I would say, and also the people who are fans of the UFC, much more anti-Me Too. I think that all figures into it. If it was a different audience that he served, then I think that audience would have been much more aggressive in calling for accountability and consequences. But he most definitely got a free pass.
That's an excellent point, Mo.
You think it's because they're anti-Me Too, Jim?
I don't know the answer, but I think it is the environment. I don't. I mean, you know, Ray Rice. I mean, a lot of. I think a lot of athletes are people looking to bring them down for, you know, slip ups, and a lot of businessmen get a pass because they have a lot of money, and you know they're in the C-suite and not in the locker room. I think that's a real problem.
No, that's a good point. But, you know, the athletes definitely have a clique of gold diggers. It's a very specific type of, you know, girl fan that makes those kinds of accusations. Because I not too long ago had a Lakers player. He's not with the Lakers anymore. And that didn't get filed. And I was dealing with, he's African-American. The assistant DA in this courthouse is also African-American. I've known her for years. She, to some extent, was struggling because she didn't want the optics of cutting a deal or cutting loose, not only a celebrity athlete, but an African-American young man, right? She just didn't want to have a part in that. But as I investigated the case, and so it was a domestic violence accusation, and it was a baby mama. So it wasn't somebody that he had just recently hooked up with, but it was someone that he had a kid with and didn't really necessarily want to have more with. And so there was like some dynamics, and she had made this accusation. And so I made my pitch, and I could see that she wants to side with me, but she was struggling with that. And so I went above her to the head DA, who was a, you know, white Jewish man. And I knew that he's just going to do what he wants to do. Doesn't really care if it's a celebrity or not, but at least he would hopefully do the right thing. So when I investigated this, I was able to come up with enough to show them that, you know, it's really he said, she said, and she's not credible. It's not going to go anywhere. So they didn't end up charging him. I think they sent him to diversion, like, you know, some sort of informal hearing, and it was done. But typically these are classic, like, Me Too accusers. You know, they make sure they end up at a party where this person's at, or these athletes are at.
Sure.
They make sure, right? And they use every opportunity to get hooked up, and then so that they can make a claim. I mean, it's pretty disgusting to me, but
well, high profile individuals who are under investigation. I mean, the spotlight of the media is following them, public is watching, and it makes it a lot more difficult, in my view, for us to do our jobs, Sarah, with able to work things out, because you've got a situation where a prosecutor is going to have to go hold a press conference and justify why he or she dropped the charges or didn't charge. I mean, that happens frequently, and we don't have to deal with that when it's, you know, just some guy working at the plant. And,
right. Well, but look, Me Too, we talked about this on another episode, Mo, where we're like, Me Too started as a movement and then became a business and then became a racket. It's currently a racket. Okay. I mean, let's just be real. Okay.
Well, to your point,
what does it do for the woman who is violated, assaulted, harassed, whatever, by the guy that doesn't have money to write a check. I mean, it really counts those. It's completely excludes those people from the universe of victims, And so I don't know what it's doing. I really know. I mean, I know what it's doing in the courtroom, which is terrible, but I don't really know how it's benefiting us right now.
Well, to your point about another high-profile celebrity who was wrongly accused, I'm reminded of former NFL wide receiver Michael Irvin, who was in a hotel, who was originally accused by a woman during Super Bowl weekend. And this woman was adamant that Michael Irvin had accosted her, and then came out, and he lost his job with the NFL Network. And then the video came out from the hotel, which provided that no, Michael Irvin did not touch this woman. It was actually the woman touching him. So to answer your question, the pendulum has originally swung so far in one direction that people started believing everything and anything prematurely without evidence to support it. Now it's swinging back in the other direction, where people, I think, are less inclined to believe anyone. And I don't think anyone is better served when we're talking about actual victims or actual assailants and assessing who was who in that.
Yeah. I mean, look, what I know is that in a courtroom, whereas before you really would have to make a case to bring in an exorbitant number of bad act witnesses. In this context, it would be other women who claim they were violated, but for some reason they're not victims in the case because either the case was not filed or the statute ran or whatever it is, right? It happened in Cosby, right? And it's not, it's not automatic that these women get to come in and talk about a pattern of conduct. But now it's like the floodgates opened, and anybody who needs their time day in court just comes in and takes a stand. And it's like, it's really, it is noticeable. And so I don't know if it's completely normal in the courtroom yet, but I hope that what you're seeing is right. I mean, we saw what happened in Danny Masterson. I mean, that was a he said, she said.
Mo, you're a fellow of the Loyola Journalist Law School. I'm not sure what that is. That's a great title, and I'm sure that hopefully you'll be able to weigh in on this question from your perspective in the media. How has the explosion of content available to everyday citizens affected criminal trials, high profile trials? I had a high profile trial that was covered by every media network. And from your perspective, what do you think?
I think it's poisoned jury pools without a doubt. I think it has clouded lay people's understanding of the law. I think Law and Order as a TV show has helped educate some people on some basics surrounding the law. But also there are a number of attorneys who do get on TV and intentionally mislead people, trying to make public appeals, and they're trying to make political arguments. They aren't actually legal arguments. And I think the general public doesn't understand. It's okay. When I say okay, you're allowed to lie to the public in an interview, but not allowed to lie in court. And people don't generally understand that distinction because of social media. And I'm not a huge fan of social media for this and other reasons. People seem to be an expert on everything in a given moment on every subject. And we actually don't know a lot about anything. In terms of the media, I think we've been woefully deficient in actually educating people about the law itself, not our feelings, but actual statutes, and also and how the law and elements needed to prove a crime, educating people so they understand what they're watching on TV in terms of a televised trial and how that's different from Law and Order. The rules of evidence, what it means to sit on a grand jury. I sat on a federal grand jury for 4 months, which greatly informs how I look at what's going on with the former president right now, or how a grand jury assesses evidence or the levels of evidentiary proof. The media needs to do a better job of explaining to people how their own judicial system works. And we have failed in that regard.
Well, Mo, I also have a problem. You and I, we met at CNN, and I mean, this doesn't happen all the time, but I see it on across the board on networks, that because of a desire to get sort of salacious, which rates, people are chosen to speak on a topic that they have no business speaking on. For example, asking, I don't know, like a law enforcement person to talk about, a very specific sort of legal proceeding that they've never been a part of. But if they bring the hype, they end up, spinning and spreading the misinformation. So I also hold responsible specifically on a more microscopic level. It's just the idea of how these news shows design their shows, how they select people for different stories. It doesn't seem to me like there's a lot of care anymore in that regard.
There's a lot of laziness. And I know as someone who's worked within the environment of cable news, you have producers who are usually under deadline, who are trying to find guests to fill a certain block, A or B or C block. Yeah. And a lot of times they're pushing guests into conversations and situations, which is not their level, their main expertise. And it's more to fulfill the need to get a guest for the segment, not necessarily a quality of segment. I have been subject to it, and I've turned down sets like, hey, that's not my expertise.
Me too.
BBC has asked me to come on and comment about what was going on in British Parliament. And I said, no, that is not my area of expertise. And a lot of people who are just happy to be on TV, be in that environment, to keep getting asked back, and it's not their area of expertise. And I think that's partially just a function of a producer trying to get a guest booked or try to get a segment done. His or her job is to get that segment done. And also sometimes the host doesn't even care. So there has to be a level of accountability for the host, the producer, as well as the network. Because
part of it is let's fill up the show. It's whatever the laziness, and part of it is the wanting somebody who brings salacious misinformation. The other part is sometimes they want a specific point of view that you're like, bro, this is not my point of view. I'm not about to say this. This happened to me with Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil's done, so I have no problem saying this, but they were pushing and pushing on it. It was, they started doing a lot of crime, and it literally was like the opposite of everything I stand for and everything I thought about the story. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't Murdoch, Jim. It was something else, but it was around that time. And I said, I'm happy to join you, but it's not going to be, you're not going to hear what you're telling me from me, and it was like,
I'm just curious for your thoughts on this, Mo. How do we break this cycle? Do we need to start teaching like media literacy or media ethics to people that are in charge? Like everybody I know is going to keep clicking the clickbait links, even though they know that it's BS. So like, what do we do about this?
We have to do everything. Part of it is when there's literacy as far as the law, and there's media literacy. I would believe that most people don't understand the distinction between actual broadcast news and the rules which govern it, as opposed to cable news and the rules which do not govern cable news. The fact that you can get on cable news and people don't understand you're listening to opinion and editorial, people talking about the news, and people don't understand the simple distinction. Let's say you like MSNBC or you like CNN, as far as what they're obligated to tell you as a consumer, it's no different than Comedy Central. They're not guided by the FCC. They're not guided by any type of parameters that traditional broadcast news, which is sharing the public airways, is responsible to. So people think, hey, I saw this on Fox News. That's not news. There may be a news component of Fox News, but that's self-imposed. If you're watching Sean Hannity, you're getting news and editorial. If you're watching Rachel Maddow, you get news and editorial. And to Sarah's point, a lot of times when I was asked on CNN specifically, I'll call them out because I've never been paid by them. They always wanted me to come on to either discuss Black issues or be the quote unquote Democrat left-leaning portion to this right-left pitting people against each other. I'm a registered independent. I vote for Republicans and Democrats freely. And I hate being put in a box where I need to be the person to talk about Black issues. No, I talk about issues going on, and they may include BLM. They may include issues of race. They may include issues of any number of things. But that's how cable news may work. And to answer your question specifically, there has to be an education process so people know what they're looking at. So when you get on Twitter, someone doesn't hand you a piece from Breitbart to answer a piece from the New York Times and say, hey, what should I believe? Or they're equal in nature. They're not at all.
Yeah, Mo, you're exactly right. And Matt, I think another way is look at Fox News, for example. They paid dearly for their coverage of the Dominion voting machines. I mean, they were just espousing or putting people on to say that there was a huge conspiracy to rig the machines, and they are still subject to liability. One of the things I'm sure you're aware, Mo, is that this podcast will be replayed on YouTube. There's a whole platform out there of internet providers who have no liability. They're given immunity by Congress, and they can, we could say the most defamatory things here on this podcast, play it on YouTube, and I think Google or Alphabet owns YouTube, and they have no liability. They're completely immune. They have no policing responsibility. And so people who are going to these platforms and getting their news, and frankly, when we picked juries probably 15 years ago, these questionnaires in federal court, we would ask, where do you get your news from? And then there was a trend that started from Facebook. And then it was like, from Facebook? Are you kidding me? And then, and so not only are there no standards on Facebook or on Twitter, I mean, there's complete immunity to the internet host provider. And so people are free to espouse anything they want. And the only remedy is for someone to sue Matt Fondelier for what he says about whomever or whatever. I mean, no one's going to chase Matt Fondelier, but, they're going to chase Fox News. They're going to chase CNN if they can. And they definitely ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Well, there's also a change in what we want. There's ignorance and there's willful ignorance. I believe, and this is going to sound very disrespectful, but I mean it as such. I believe most consumers of information don't want information. They want affirmation. They have a viewpoint. They have a set of beliefs, and they will go to the spot which affirms them or says exactly what they want to believe to shape their worldview or reaffirm their worldview. For example, it doesn't matter what you believe about the 2020 election. People are still going to believe that it was a fraudulent election and there was massive fraud everywhere, regardless of how much actual evidence to the contrary or lack of evidence that there was fraud, which is put out there. It doesn't matter that there were 62 cases and some 61 were decided against the idea of fraud, be it standing or on the merits. People are going to believe what they want to believe. We live in our information silos, unfortunately. And going back to Matt's question, we can do all the education we want, but there's a level of deprogramming that we need to do as well. Because you have Rudy Giuliani saying, truth is not truth. We have Kellyanne Conway saying, alternate facts. People understand now, and we're seeing it bear itself out. You can believe what you want and not suffer any societal penalty for that. You have people such as Kyrie Irving and Shaquille O'Neal, prominent individuals, not news figures, but prominent individuals who are openly espousing that the earth is flat. It is 2023, and there's still portions of what I say, educated society. Both of them went to college institutions who were openly espousing the world is flat. What do we do with that? I honestly don't know.
Wow.
Does anyone know? It just reminded me when you were talking about the UFC guy. What's his name? I forget.
Dana White. Do
you remember the Florida guy who was the owner of a?
You're thinking about Robert Kraft. I know that's who you're talking about.
What happened? He got cut slack, right?
Yeah, he did for his prostitution.
Right. He definitely. It was like it quietly just went away. That he definitely got a favor from someone down there. Anyway, so look, Mo, this just recently came on my radar. I'm an old hip hop fan, not a gangster rap fan, but it came on my radar shooting season 2 of that Death by Fame show that you and I talked about on your show. That Jam Master Jay's the three suspect in Jam Master Jay's death are finally being brought to trial in federal court in the Eastern District of New York in January. And we just recently learned that there was a search warrant that was executed in Las Vegas in the Tupac murder investigation. And so when Tupac and Biggie were killed, them being, representing old hip hop, there was this code of silence that followed in that world. And even though there was a lot of East Coast versus West Coast rivalry and people were getting killed, nobody wanted to come forward and talk. So there was a want of witnesses at that time. And so now suddenly, they're being brought to trial. The Tupac investigation is reopened. What do you attribute this to? Is it that people are more willing to speak and that it's a different sort of culture in that world? Or what is it? Because it's not forensic evidence.
Yeah. I say this as someone who worked for Virgin Records in hip hop during the mid 90s when both Tupac and Biggie Smalls were killed. So I lived this. I know it intimately. I worked with Suge Knight at Interscope Records in the early 2000s. So I knew him, dealt with him. And I think if I could give you just a succinct answer, people are getting old. They're dying. They're going to jail. Suge Knight, for example, who was a prominent figure in that East-West Coast rivalry, is in jail, presumably for the rest of his life. He doesn't have the same type of power, influence, or hold over would-be witnesses that he did 25 years ago. I think it's a combination of those things. And it might not be more evidence, but you see how and this is one good part of social media, I think there is strength and cover with social media. You don't feel as alone. There is a contingent who will support you if you are going to come forward. You saw that with Bill Cosby. You saw that with the Me Too movement. You saw that with other movements. So if I were to attribute it to anything, a combination of people getting old, people dying, people going to jail, and the power of feeling that you have some sort of support through social media where you can get things out there either anonymously or with your name behind it, and you're not necessarily as exposed in the sense of vulnerable that you would have been 25 years ago. You could have gone to the police 25 years ago. No one would have known about it except the police and maybe the informants, and you could have been you would have been vulnerable, and you could have been killed for offering up information or snitching, as it were, where it's just different now.
Is the rivalry just as bad now as it was then? I mean, I know Suge. He almost hired me, but he had no money for anybody. So he was going through a lot of attorney consultations and interviews, and so many of us spoke to him. But talk about just going broke. It was crazy. But is it the same now that it was then in terms of the...
No, let's go back through musical history. In the late 90s, radio was programmed in a local sense. In other words, what West Coast radio was playing on a station like KKBT in Los Angeles was very different from Hot 97 in New York. You had local programmers, and they were playing just East Coast music on the East Coast. They were playing just West Coast music. They were playing just Two Live Crew in the South and Master P. And that's gone now because you have these radio conglomerates and you have these regional programmers, and they all play the same 17 songs. If you listen to a radio station in LA or a radio station in New York, they're playing pretty much the same music. And rap does not have the type of identity today that it did 25 years ago. Yeah. They're not talking about anything. They're not really claiming anything. It's mumble rap. It's not about anything. It's not espousing anything. Back then, it was about bling and where you were from, what area of the country you represented. Now, I'm not sure what it's about, if anything at all. There's not that cliquishness. Now, there's violence, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's usually on an individual level. Right. Because individual rappers will have beef. If a rapper gets shot because he put where he was on Instagram. There was an individual beef going on. It's not a regional in nature. It's different, but it's not a rivalry.
I think on a consumer level too, you've got a program like Spotify or these huge music services that not only will give you playlists from music from all over the country or globe, but then you can also even like dive into an artist that you like, and then it will kind of show you how it's connected to other music. And I think, again, as a consumer, it gives everybody more of like a generalized sense of everything being connected instead of it all just being a big rivalry. Having said that, West Coast.
Drake is from Canada, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a different ethic. It's a more of a world ethic. It's hip hop back then was a genre. Now hip hop is popular music. It's the most popular form of music in the world.
It was a genre, and it was, and this is why I loved old hip. I still do. Old hip hop was a celebration of the streets. You know, it was bringing the streets to the masses. And then gangster rap, even though I wasn't into it, it was bringing the violent side of the streets to the masses. And so, but each had a purpose and a meaning. And now, like you said, Mo, it's like, what the hell? What are they saying? Half the time, I'm like, what is?
When hip hop started, it was talking about New York. It was mass transit music. It was music that people would listen to on the subway. When you had gangster rap, it was talking about what was going on in LA. Master P was talking about what was going on down south in Louisiana. You had Rap Laws talking about what was going on in Houston. It was built on a regional foundation. You had So Def of Jermaine Dupri in Atlanta. It was predicated on where you were from and what type of music you're bringing your hood, as it were, or neighborhood to the masses and put your city and region on the map. None of that matters anymore.
No.
At all.
You've been speaking about the dark side of Hollywood, which also very much interests us. What do you mean by that?
When I say I laugh, I chuckle, not to minimize it, but it's weird how today, in today's media, the shock and disbelief at the behavior of a Bill Cosby or a Matt Lauer or a Bill O'Reilly or a supposed Johnny Depp or Kevin Spacey. And it's not about guilt or innocence. I'm just saying these issues have been pervasive for decades.
Right.
Music industry was just a microcosm of the larger entertainment industry. People, usually men with lots of money and lots of power, use that money and power to abuse people with less power. Usually it had to do with women. It was pervasive in the music industry. I had less contact to the television industry and movie industry, but I knew it went on there. I can tell you story after story of young women who came to Hollywood hoping to get in the music industry, working on video sets as video girls and being sodomized and mistreated because they wanted to be in the industry so bad, and they found themselves in compromised positions, or the different record companies which were covering up the payola. People, if you thought back in the 90s that you were calling into a radio station, and if you kept calling, you get to hear your preferred piece of music on radio, you're being lied to. That's about as nice as I could put it. The amount of money which was used, the payola to promote artists and to also kill other artists' records. That was the amount of drugs in the industry, the poor deals. Like, for example, everyone knows TLC, for example. Don't go chasing waterfalls. The whole idea, and you would understand this as a person of the law, any lawyer, they were being managed by Pebbles, who was married to the president of the company. The manager is about getting as much money for herself as a function of creating a deal with the record company. Well, if you have the manager and the president of the record company literally in bed with one another, then how is an artist supposed to make any money? Not surprisingly, after millions of albums being sold, they were broke. And that was very common in the industry. Part of it was ignorance and not being educated about how the business worked as far as royalties and recoupable expenses. But a lot of it was intentional in nature. So a lot of lives, a lot of careers were ruined. It just on a music level, from sexual abuse to financial, just criminality on any number of levels.
It's like, I was telling Jim a couple weeks ago that I didn't know the story about James Brown. and how there's this very plausible conspiracy that, you know, he may have been killed for money because of his entertainment lawyer and I think accountant he was enslaved to them. I mean, literally. And I didn't know that story, but I think we touched upon this earlier. It's this whole idea of Hollywood is dirty, as you know. I mean, it's not it's far from a perfect world. And now we're seeing all this stuff with reality TV stars and how they're not getting residuals and they're being abused. There's alcohol everywhere because they want them to get drunk and say stupid shit that's salacious. I mean, it's just horrible. So whether it's financial, quasi criminal, or a Me Too type of abuse, there's a lot behind closed doors in Hollywood that I think people like you can expose, using your platform.
Well, that's part of the reason, going back to Britney Spears very quickly, my concern for her as someone who did not write a lot of her music or any of her music, and how she is being forced to perform, because that's about the only way that she can maintain income for her estate. And if people don't understand, she doesn't own her song publishing. So right. She doesn't get royalties when her song is played on the radio. She doesn't get royalties, mechanical licensing royalties, when her song is used in a commercial. I love Toxic as much as anyone, but if you hear it in a movie, Britney Spears, the person's not getting paid for that. It's the owner of the publishing and the copyright. Yeah. And so part of I would say the abuse of Britney had to do with, she was the moneymaker, but for her to make money, she had to tour. She had to perform. That's why you see a lot of these artists performing until they're 75, 80 years old, because they only have the performance royalty rights. That's the only way they can make money. Not when it's played on the radio, not when it's sold as part of a larger catalog. And so that's another part of the not often discussed abuse of artists in the industry. And I worry about Britney Spears, who presumably may have to perform until she's 75 or 80, because that's about the only way that she'd be able to maintain her lifestyle, or she ends up broke like TLC and any number of artists like too many to mention.
Well, Madonna's doing it. She's up there age.
Yeah.
What about somebody? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mo.
Well, I was going to say, do you think that she wants to tour around the world, or possibly needs to tour on some level?
I think she probably needs to on some level. I mean, I think, look, she also doesn't do what most people her age have done, which is go to Vegas, for example, like Cher did, or others have done. What's her name? The Canadian.
Celine Dion.
Celine Dion, and Madonna needs to be dancing like she was when she was 30 years old and having the, her gay fans all around her. And so I'm always, when she comes on stage, I'm always afraid she's going to break something, but I think she needs to. I mean, the other thing too is like, look, money stops coming in at some point. Like you talked about the residuals, royalties, whatever, but like, during in a celebrity's, the course of their stardom and when they're at the height of their career, they're also accumulating a lot of assets and they're spending a lot of money. They're developing a certain lifestyle that is not easy to maintain. And so that money needs to keep coming in, honey. Otherwise, you got to get rid of some of that shit. And so that's why I feel like she needs to work.
Well, that's why a lot of these artists are now choosing to sell their catalogs for hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's assuming that you own the rights to these songs to be able to sell them in the first place.
Yeah.
What about somebody like, Taylor Swift now has those like Taylor's version, where I guess she re-recorded the song so that she can now control the rights. And I guess she's got a big enough fan base that I suppose radio stations will now play her version of the song. Is that, replicable for somebody like Britney Spears or any performer for that matter? Or is this really just a one-off?
Yeah, she would have to. Now, to Taylor Swift's credit, I did some investigation on her. She has songwriting credit on just about all of her hits. She will be fine. If she wants to never tour again, never do another concert, she'll be just fine. But in your example, if Britney Spears were willing to do that, where she would be able to get mechanical royalties off these new recordings that she would make and she would own. Now, she wouldn't have the publishing rights as far as the song rights, but she would have the mechanical rights where if Spotify or whatever were to play these versions of the song, she would get paid for that. That would be something that she could do, but I don't know if she's getting the advice for her to even consider doing it.
Well, I hope she's listening right now, because I think we just made her a millionaire all over again. You're welcome, Brittany.
Yeah, I want points on her next album.
Right.
All right, guys. Mo, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we're going to call upon you to come back as all of these great things in your wheelhouse come up, and you can share with us your expertise. So thanks for joining us today. Matt and Jim, we are going to rest until next week.
Yes, we rest.